Okay, welcome, Lewis Black, the iconic Lewis Black. Um, I'm, Let me say first of all that you are, I hope you feel the same way, one of my absolute dearest friends. And unfortunately, I don't get to see you as much as I used to, but the good news is that you are in recovery, and that makes me happier than I can express. And so I'm delighted that you chose to do this interview and talk about these personal things. I think your story, I know a little about your story. I think it's definitely some of um, the most interesting journey throughout around uh, intimate connection I've ever heard. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, how it is that people know you, what it is you do, and then we'll jump into a little bit of your history.
I lived in Austin, Texas for decades. While I was there, I started and co-founded the Austin Chronicle, the weekly paper, and I edited it for 30 years. And then a couple of years later, with some friends, I co-founded South by Southwest. I was an executive director there, and actually, I was the one who we started as music, and in '94 we initiated film, and I was the driving force behind South by Southwest Film. And then in the 2000s, when I was in my 50s, I began producing films. Very much, very happily backed into that. And since then, I've had a film that won a Peabody and won an Emmy, and I produced a lot of films. And then I also found independent films that people thought were lost and restored them. So, I've had my life has been a great adventure.
Yeah, it really has been. And I will tell you that you're not just beloved by me, but just about everyone I know in Austin. You're one of Austin's favorite icons. I think I saw you on the cover of a magazine once that said one of Austin's icons or something. Yeah, that's kind of how we know you. I know you're also a very humble person, but yeah, what you've done for this city is not small. What you've done for a lot of struggling artists, myself included, is not small. You're one of the most greatest supporters of the arts in Austin, and we're all very happy that you're still alive and kicking and sober. So yeah, on that, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got sober? I don't think it happened for you the first time. There were some relapses involved, but you've been sober for a while now. So when did you get sober this last time? How long have you been sober, and how old are you?
Okay, I'm 74. I never tried to get sober. I had worse luck that an alcoholic and drug addict can have, which is I succeeded, and I succeeded, and I didn't have a bottom. I literally went in the hospital when I was 60 with the DTS. I was tied to a bed and congestive heart failure. And while I was in there, one of my partners came in to tell me that my bonus that year was going to be 1.4 million. And it wasn't just money, because I didn't care about money at all. It was I got to do creative stuff that really mattered to me. I mean, a handful of times when we tried to make money was a disaster. But doing what I loved, it worked out, and in a lot of ways. So I never tried to get sober. When I was in my 60s, my son came to me one day and said, "You have to go into rehab." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the maids say you have enough speed for all of Austin." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I have that much speed. It means I'm not doing that much." Which is a junkie thing. If you're doing it, you're doing it. And he didn't think that was funny. So I went to rehab at the Meadows in Arizona. And it's just, I spend a lot of time trying to think about this, because I didn't think of myself as an alcoholic or a drug addict. I knew I was addicted. I mean, I knew I had huge problems, but things went so well. Through this whole time, there were periods where I got strung out. There were periods where, I went to the hospital and stuff. But then you look, and the next year I produced 5 films, or the next year I won an Emmy or a Peabody, or I wrote some great stuff. The whole time I kept working. And so I didn't really try and get sober. I bought a house in Cape Cod, and I came up here, and two very good friends of an important producer and the drummer for one of the great punk bands visited, and there was blood and vials all over the house. So I went back into rehab. And that was the first time I kind of took it seriously. But when I came out, I couldn't imagine the rest of my life without drinking or alcohol. I mean, without drinking drugs. And so I hired an assistant on the Cape to help me with my business matters. And my assistant just celebrated his 50th year sober. And he took me to an AA meeting in Provincetown at 7 a.m. in the morning. And that's my home group. Since I've been there, and it's been about 4 years now, I relapsed twice. But what happened is, as soon as I walked, within a few months, I had a head full of AA, and even when I had a stomach full of drugs, it wasn't working. AA was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, it was literally like, this is why I've always believed in a higher power. All the stuff I did, I didn't do. I used to say, I go the way the wind blows, but I couldn't have done what I did. You know what I mean? It wasn't doing the paper, doing South by, supporting people. It was because of a higher power. And I was always in the service. I always believed in a very moral and ethical universe. And when I came into AA, I was the worst kind of blowhard. You're talking about me, and there's a total disconnect between who I am and the Macy's Day Parade balloon of me. And when I came in, I kept showing off the balloons. Look who I am. Look, I'm better than the rest. I'm different than the rest of you, and because they're gonna love you until you learn to love yourself, they put up with it. And gradually, and it just became learning how to live small. I had always lived big, and I lived big because I was running away from myself. I lived big because I didn't want to spend any time with myself. When we talk about this, we talk about intimacy. I never expected intimacy. I never expected a successful relationship. My relationships were disastrous. That's pretty much what I predicted. And part of it was, if somebody liked me, I didn't trust them. If they didn't like me, I thought, oh, let's move in. But so in AA, it was gradual. And the first time I relapsed was real relapse. I had a bunch of coke, and I didn't went to the hospital, and they decided I had COPD because I was breathing so badly. And then when I got home, I thought, well, let me do the rest of the coke. And I went right back to the hospital. But after that, I got really serious. And I began working at it. And I relapsed once because I found a little baggie of powder because I write and I have, folders and stuff. And I did it. And then I went to Betty Ford for 6 weeks. And then the second time I relapsed I was in Austin. It wasn't a relapse. I'm at 4 months now. I have been at more than that. But when I was in Austin, and to go to sleep, I take melatonin, and I'll take like 4 melatonin, then 6 melatonin, and then 8 melatonin because I'm an addict.
Because if one is good, 20 is better.
Better. And so I was in Austin, and there were some over-the-counter sleep medication. Took 2, I took 4, I took 6. I ended up outside, hallucinating, falling down. There was a party going on, and I kept talking to people in my house because I let people use my house for a party. And I kept talking to people who were going in, and they would talk to me, but then ignore me. And other friends came and talked to me. And eventually I made it back into the house. And I thought, I thought that was Monday. And so Tuesday morning when I got up, my friend was there, and I said, what was the party last night? He said, there was no party last night. And then it turned out it was Monday, not Tuesday. I had gone outside Sunday night and thought there was a whole day going. And I just had hallucinated as badly as I've ever hallucinated. And it was over the counter drugs. And I came back, and I was going to be running a big book meeting on Tuesday, except my home group and my sponsor, just as I was sitting down to do it, came running in and said, stop. And took me aside and said, I want you to start your day count over again. So it wasn't drugs, but it was addictive behavior. And I said, thank you. I said, thank you,
Mhm.
because it was absolutely the right thing.
Yeah.
And so, getting sober is like is in it's kind of the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also I never liked me. I never spent time with me, and suddenly, like, I was at the deck one day outside, and I remember feeling totally weird. Someone was really strange, and I realized, wait, I'm happy. And it doesn't last long. I mean, my whole life I kept thinking I should be doing this, I should be doing that. When I went in the hospital when I was 60, I didn't think I had done anything. I had already done the paper in South by Southwest and films, but I didn't, because I always thought about what I hadn't done.
Yeah.
And I always was consumed with my failures.
Right. But that's what we do, right? We get our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth frequently from what we do, who we know, not not the fact that we're as one of my friends put it, which is just one that I always like, you're a beautiful child of God. You're worth something for that alone. We don't get self-esteem from doing esteemable things. It's more like, who you know and what you can accomplish that looks impressive in the world. For me, when I was at a tender age of 20 and I was just developing my identity, I hooked up with a very famous rock star, and I thought, well, that's a much easier identity, the girlfriend of a rock star, than a wannabe writer or college student or whatever. So we're always getting our identity and sense of self-esteem from other sources. And in your case, a lot like Joe Walsh, my ex, when you're so successful, it's so easy to just convince yourself you either don't have a problem or the problem is manageable or it doesn't matter. In Joe's case, what's interesting is, his creative output was really declining. His last few albums weren't, the inspiration wasn't there, the musicality wasn't there. And that probably contributed to his eventual knowledge that he needed to get sober. Whereas you had just put out a book. You had just won an Emmy shortly before you got sober. But I will tell you one area of your life that I personally know was not working all that well was intimacy. And it's this thing, but so much of what you said is I could have an hour-long interview on about 10 things that you said regarding sobriety. But the one that I'm zeroing in on is you didn't like yourself, and anyone who liked you didn't trust. And if someone didn't like you, well, that's a person you're going to move in with. I feel very lucky that you and I were able to forge the close relationship that we did because I truly liked you. But there was something I think that you and I have a very unique bond. And I will also say that there came a point in our relationship where you severed it. And it was when you decided, I think you were toying with sobriety. And at one point, you literally said to me, I don't really want to be sober, and I know to be in your life, I have to be. And it broke my heart because I saw the choice you were making. I understood the choice you were making. I'd made the same choice. I lost Joe because I couldn't get sober. I wasn't ready to get sober. I know that choice. But the choices that you made all the way up to then, including a marriage and a live-in relationship where you were with women that I think it's fair to say did not like you very much. In fact, one of them, I dare say, people in your circle spoke to me privately saying, we're very worried about this person. We think she might kill him. This is
One,
who you chose to share your home with. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about
well,
the unsuccessful part of your aside from your health issues, the unsuccessful part being, did you ever have a successful, intimate, romantic relationship before you got sober?
one part of my problem with you is we had a relationship that was honest and intimate, and I didn't know how to handle it. You know what I mean? And it wasn't just that I didn't want to get sober. I didn't know how to be intimate without drugs and alcohol and sex. So when I was in my 20s, I had two good relationships. One in high school, one shortly after for a couple of years. And this is one of those great, where revisionist histories, because in both cases, I kept thinking I could do better than this, and I couldn't. These are two amazing women One of them is married to my partner and has been my best friend for 50 years and saved my life innumerable times. Um, but she cheated on me, and I hated her, and then it worked. But I had two relationships, and again, I wasn't committed. But after that, I have not had a good relationship. When I got married, I mean, to a wonderful woman, but it was the relationship wasn't good. And I don't want to go into too much of it because she's the mother of my child,
Of course.
but it's what I expected. I didn't expect happiness. I didn't expect joy. I
It's
thought it was exactly the kind of relationship I thought.
right. It's what you thought you deserved. You thought you deserved to be unhappy and to not have love and intimacy and
And yeah, it wasn't what I deserved. It was what yeah, that was all I earned.
yeah.
And I had other relationships, and my relationships tended to be with women who were a cross between my mother and a Nazi concentration camp commandant because I went off the rails. And what's weird about these women is, with most of them, I think if they could have had a cardboard cutout of me and my money and my prestige, they could have easily lived without me. I mean, it was very strange because I am immature. I mean, I'm strikingly immature. When you do drugs and alcohol until your 60s, and when you're successful, and when you isolate through all of it, you don't really grow up. I was just in France at the Cannes Film Festival because a friend had a film, and there were two people who I worked with a lot over the years. And both of them, at one point or another, said to me, we didn't realize you had a real problem with drugs and alcohol. So one thought was, God, I must have been so crazy. They didn't know. I mean, I was just been a lunatic in general. And the other was I isolated. I didn't. People in AA talk about going to bars and doing. I stayed home. I drank. I did a lot of speed, and I worked. I smoked a lot of pot, and I worked. I loved working.
You
And
also, I will say, you are one of the best liars I've ever met. I am someone who can usually spot an addict, and I spent a lot of time with you for a couple of years. And you told me you're ADD and you have terrible insomnia. And I know what happens when you have terrible insomnia. You're a very you're very emotional. You're very moody. You're a little psychotic. I had severe insomnia, and so I attributed it to that. I'd never seen a 60-something-year-old on speed. I used to hang out with teenagers on speed. So I never really I knew that you were doing something and it was probably bad, but I believed you when you said I thought he's probably bipolar. He's got a little psychosis from the terrible insomnia. He's got an eating disorder. He's probably doing a little something, maybe a little coke or whatever. But honestly, like you fooled me. You're one of the best liars I've ever met.
Professionally, I'm a liar. I was an editor. I was a community leader. I mean, I made stuff happen, and I always believe strongly that the ends justify the means, but you have to be absolutely righteous about the means. And I was. I mean, I can say this now because looking back in my life, I can do the printout. I can give you the dates and names, and I'm proud of most of it. But I was messed up, and as a matter of fact, when I was involved with the woman who would have just as happily seen me dead, she called me doing speed one day, and I told her it was coke. And afterwards, whenever I was doing speed, she called me. She would give me a drug test that she bought at the drugstore, and it'd be for coke, and I always scored negative. I'm not proud of it. I mean,
Well, mean, yeah, I guess I could see why you're not technically proud of that, but it is a little impressive, to be honest. I want to circle back to something you said that is so important to me and is going to come up. It came up in my last interview. It's going to come up in every interview. It's a huge theme in my life. You said you ended up with women who were a cross between your mother and a concentration camp sergeant or whatever. So this is, I know this is just through my training as a counselor. I was, as you know, a certified sexuality counselor. I went through a lot of training. a bit of an autodidact when it comes to therapy and sex therapy in general. And I know for a fact that most of us end up with someone who resembles one of our parents. And my father's one of the greatest men I know. I have him a bit on a pedestal. I think he's just tremendous and perfect in almost every way. But I will say also that he worked so much, and for a variety of reasons, he's not someone who was continuously able to be there for me in ways that I needed when I was needed someone to depend on emotionally, when I was either acting out or when I was severely depressed, which, like my mother, I was clinically depressed for most of my life. And my father was someone who tended to see the life as the glass half full. He didn't see the pain I was in, so he wasn't able to comfort me through it. My framework of men growing up, I learned through my relationship with my father that men would always love me. They would cherish me. They would delight in me. They would put me on a pedestal. They would never not love me or want to be with me, but they would never be dependable. I could never depend on them emotionally in a pinch or depend on them in ways that in a relationship, an intimate relationship, you sometimes need to depend on someone, whether that's emotionally or financially. So I grew up thinking I've depend on myself. I will always be loved and cherished and delighted in, but I can never depend on a man. And every man I attracted into my life up until my husband, my last, well, maybe there was one man before him who actually was the only dependable man I ever dated 10 years ago, but he had none of the other good qualities of my father. And I only dated him because I thought this is the most dependable man. He will always be there for me, no matter what. An aunt died and I had this very difficult funeral to go to, and he jumped on a plane and was there from like anything you could need from somebody emotionally he was there for, but he was a jerk in every other way. So then I met my current husband, who not only is just one of the most wonderful people in the world that is like my father in so many ways, just a delight to be around and loves and cherishes me, but it is also emotionally dependable. It's the first time in my 50s that I ever had that, because you will attract what you're used to. You'll attract what you believe is that core relationship, and so for a lot of men, the women that they attract have a lot of their mother's good qualities, but also the negative qualities. Like if she was hypercritical, you're going to end up with someone who maybe is nurturing in some ways, but hypercritical in others. And we do that until at some point we realize I deserve better, right? And does that resemble your path?
Yeah. So first, my father. My father did not. My father loved me, but he didn't think I would function in society. So he was angry at me. He thought I was lazy and stupid, and he was mad at me a lot of the time. But he loved me. It wasn't like he was a bad person. And I was in a meeting, and a woman was talking, and she talked about how she had finally forgiven her mother. And I had this shocking moment where I realized I had never been angry at my dad. I thought he was right. I had so internalized what he thought of me. And then my mom was my biggest supporter, but she needed me to be weird. She needed me to be different. And with my current sponsor, who I've only had for months, but no, actually my therapist. My therapist said to me one day, "Was your mother affectionate?" And I never thought about it. My mother was never affectionate. My mother, she was critical. Um, she was loving, but never affectionate, and not really there. And her brother had been enormously fat. And so for the time I was born, she had me on diets. So like there's a picture of me, this skinny little kid who thought I was fat. I don't think I've ever taken a bite of food without feeling guilty, seriously, which is why I ended up fat. But so I was messed up by both of them, and I wasn't prepared. They were typical. They got married young. My dad, after the war, and they had no idea how to be parents or how to love each other. They stayed together until he died. I mean, she's still alive. She's 102.
And
But
that's
I
another, I hate to interrupt, but that is another very important key to all of this is our parents are the first example we have of intimacy. So if they're
right.
not doing it well, that's kind of what we base our future relationships on as well.
They fought constantly, and I hated their fighting. And then when I got married, I fought every day with my wife because she would pick a fight, and I hated it, and I felt part of it. And when I finally left her and started hanging out with my son, and we never fought, I realized how trapped I had been. And I respond. I expect to be criticized. You know what I mean? I rise to the bait, and so it really hasn't been. I'm so new on the path of knowing who I am that it's kind of astonishing, and I'm luckier than most because I have a wonderful history. I have an army of enormously great friends. I've done really good work, and I have money, but I'm still not sure who I am, and I'm still have a little trouble. I spend a lot of time alone. I have a house on the ocean. I spend a lot of time alone there, but I haven't found my groove yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got sober like 4 years ago. You had a couple of relapses, but let's just say I don't think they lasted terribly long. So let's say for the most part, you've been active in recovery for 4 years, right? I didn't know who I was for a minimum of 10, and that's when I had my first actual relationship in sobriety. So it had been 12 years since I'd been in a relationship. That relationship taught me more about what not to do. Like it was a great learning experience, but then I spent the next 10 years really figuring out who I am. I mean, I've been sober for 28 years, working actively a 12-step program. Though I don't go to a lot of meetings anymore, the 12 steps are such an integral part of my life and my approach to life that it's the lens through which I view the world, through which I interact in the world. So I am very much in recovery. And I'm telling you, after 28 years, I feel like I'm really just getting to know who I am just over the last like maybe 5, 8 years. And I don't think that that stops you from being in a relationship or being loved, but it does block probably the deepest, most rewarding forms of intimacy. If you don't know who you are, you don't really know what you have to give and what you have to offer. And you need to know two things to have a successful, intimate relationship. You need to know what it is that you need and so you can identify this person is right for me, this person is wrong for me, or this person might be right for me if we can kind of help each other grow and change and mature a little bit. You can't identify what's right for you if you don't know what you need, and if you don't know who you are, you don't know what you need. The other thing is you don't know who you're right for if you don't know who you are and what you have to offer. So it makes it very difficult. But I will say also that I think dating is one of the best ways to figure these things out. Now, dating is harder and harder every year that goes by. I was a dating coach for 6 years. So just going out and meeting people, especially when you're in Cape Cod, I don't think there's a whole lot of people there 9 months out of the year. Are you on any dating sites? Has anyone tried to fix you up? Have you met anyone?
No, I tried dating sites and it didn't work. And I spent a lot of time in Provincetown, where all the women are gay. I have many friends who are gay. Also, I'm 74. I don't know how to begin dating. I mean, and again, I didn't have sober sex until I was in my 60s. And I never had good relationships, but I loved drugs, alcohol, and sex. And there were always women who I was involved in, who knew, I mean, we were both on the same page. Um, and so I got what I needed, but I didn't know how to be an adult. And and then recently, one of the women who I was involved with, who was my drug dealer, who I helped support, sued me, claiming that she worked for me and that I sexually exploited her. And and it really because it was very public, because I was a public figure, it actually did damage to me.
Yeah.
And she wanted 1.8 million, and I finally settled for like 5% of that because it would have cost more to go to court. And also because if I won, it would have made no difference.
Mhm.
But it was still when I met for the, even now when I meet people, if they look me up, they stop talking to me. I just hired somebody to clean my website, one
Oh,
of those firms. But it was, and I wasn't surprised. Like, my assistant who would always look at me and say, you know, are you surprised about this? You did this. And one of the things is I'm working the fourth step right now. And I'm actually looking at the fifth, sixth, and seventh step. But I'm working the fourth step, and it's been life changing in a way I would have not believed because I began looking at my whole life, and I never thought I was a victim. Um, but I discovered in every case, like my partner and my ex fell in love, and I was angry. I thought they were both doing this to me, and there was that moment where only they fell in love, and 40 years later they're still together. So they really fell in love. But it was really realizing like a lot of what offended me was not aimed at me. My participation, where I would be strung out on drugs, so I wasn't showing up, and I would say, "Why are people treating me this way?" And the fourth step was literally I'm astonished at AA because two guys, Dr. Bob and Bill W. meet, and Dr. Bob says, I'm going to leave in 15 minutes. And hours later, they're still talking, and they changed the world. And they're lay people, and they changed my life.
yeah.
A
Yeah.
book I want to do is people tell stories about their sponsors, like just brilliant wisdom from their sponsors. Their sponsors are lay people. They don't have any training.
Yeah.
They talk to you in AA. People talk to each other from the heart.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best sponsor, I had a couple of sponsors who were amazing and a couple that were kind of short-term interim sponsors, I guess, when one of mine, when I moved away and then another time my sponsor moved away. But there was these two women, hi Jessica, hi Tony, who I call them the best sponsors ever because what they did was they taught me how to work the 12 steps as they're laid out in the big book. They didn't make up stuff for me to do. They didn't make up rules for me to follow. They didn't tell me, do this, don't do that. You have to call me every night. You're not allowed to date. They didn't present themselves as a therapist. They were great listeners, but they knew what step one, two, three, and four. They knew how step four should go. They knew how step five should go. They knew how to help me through step six and seven. They knew how to talk me off the ledge by using the steps. They taught me the steps out of the big book, which is the only job of a sponsor is to teach you the 12 steps out of the big book. And, the fourth step, I'm glad you brought that up. That's kind of where we first really get a good look at our own misconduct. Our resentments are, for those who don't know, who haven't worked the steps or who aren't in recovery, who are watching this, the fourth step is a personal inventory, a searching and fearless moral inventory, where you list on paper all of your fears and where they come from, and you analyze them. And then all of your resentments and where they come from, and you analyze those in a very specific way. And then your misconduct. And when it comes to misconduct, so much of what we do to hurt other people was in intimate relationships, like who you cheated on or who you treated poorly. And you have to look at that and where that behavior came from. And then you have to talk to in step five, you have to share all that with your sponsor. And then in step six, and seven, you have to give up that behavior, that self-seeking behavior, that fearful behavior, that manipulative behavior. And of course, you spend the rest of your life trying to change those behaviors. But I remember saying to my sponsor when it came to step six and seven, like we had gone through step five, and I'm trying to do six and seven at home alone, which is really a matter of reading and a little bit of praying, and it's sort of an inner decision that I'm willing to change, and then you're going to accept the challenges that life sends you that help you make those changes, right? But I had such a hard time looking at this list of, fear and greed and manipulation and self-seeking, and like thinking, I don't think I want to change that behavior because that's how I got everything I got in life. How the hell am I going to get a partner if I'm not a little manipulative? How am I going to find a really good boyfriend if I'm not self-seeking and a little deceitful? Because if I'm honest about who I am, because that's the thing, that's what intimacy is like letting someone really see the real you with all of your flaws. And if I'm honest about that, nobody's ever going to want to be with me because, like you said earlier, we don't like ourselves. When we get sober, we have so much shame over what we've done, but we wouldn't have become addicts and alcoholics in the first place if we really loved ourselves. So we don't like ourselves to begin with. Then we act in ways that perpetuate the deep shame we have. By the time we get sober, we're full of self-loathing, and we think usually we're so emotionally isolated by then that the day we get sober, we're all desperate to connect because there's this huge void. But we hate ourselves. So how do you connect with someone authentically and let them see you when you hate yourself? What kind of person are you going to end up with? So of course you have to be deceitful, and it just doesn't work. I forgot even where I was going with that tangent, but the fourth step is to me, it's the really active step you take to start seeing all of that stuff so that you can eventually let it go. And it does take time. And I did a number of four steps. My first one was like 100 pages long. I don't know how long yours was, but every couple of years, I'd see some of the same behaviors, some of the same fears and resentments and misconduct coming up, and I'd do a shorter, whatever, 3-page inventory. And I still do like a mental inventory. But like when I got with my husband 3.5 years ago, something like that, all these fears came up that I thought that I was over, that I had worked through. But because this was, I think I knew on an unconscious level that this could be the real thing, that deepest core of that onion of, layers and layers and layers of fear got triggered. And all that mistrust I had that a man was truly going to be there for me, truly dependable for me, was never going to leave me, even if he got to know the ugliest side of me, the most selfish side of me, or the most rigid side of me, or the most promiscuous side of me, or all those things that I didn't really think uh, I could show somebody and have them still love me. And month by month, he got to know those sides and never left and kept telling me he loved me and kept telling me he wanted to marry me. I was 54 when we met, and I did not, it took me close to 2.5 years before that man convinced me that there was nothing about me he was going to see that was going to chase him off. I don't even think 54 is the important number here. I think the important number is I was 25 years sober. So it's a journey, right?
It's a total journey. And in my case, I was so many different people because I had to be. And so I'm still don't know who I am. I mean, I still don't know, I was, I, I'm still shocked sometimes at the way other people perceive me because there's nothing to do with how I perceive myself. You know what I mean? The high regard people have, or I just the way people want to console with me on things, and I still am this scared little kid, and I was feral because of my dad, because I did terrible in school, because I had, I thought I was lazy and dumb, and I still don't get that moment of tenacity where I decided, damn it, full speed ahead, because that's how I lived my life, and I didn't have any of the tools for that. But so I'm still like, because there's so much in my wake, to be honest, I'm trying to figure out who I am, and I'm in a better place than a lot of people. I mean, I mostly have my help. I have friends. I have stuff I'm proud of. I'm working on stuff, but I'm still, when you were talking before, when I first came into AA, I was the worst name dropper. I wanted people to know I was important. And my sponsor was one was very, yeah, it would be like you'd go, like, those cartoons with the dog, blah, 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 blah. He'd go, famous name, blah, 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 famous name, blah, 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 blah. And I've now apologized several times to the group And they laughed because, I wanted you to know how important I was.
Yeah.
Actually, my group is largely gay, and it's great because we have the same issue of growing up and not fitting in at all and
Yeah.
not understanding. But one time they were just talking about acceptance and things like that. It was my turn. I said, I just want you to know I'm heterosexual, but you guys have always made me feel
Yeah.
welcome.
That's funny.
And I love my group. You sit there and you laugh about the ugliest, darkest secrets.
Yeah.
You really, I'm learning to love myself, and it's still hard.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of time. And it's interesting because you do have a little bit of a backwards. It's not uncommon by any means to get sober in your 60s and be a success. I've seen people who are extremely successful, get sober and later in life, and then what they have to deal with is the it's sort of a time crunch when it comes to, how am I gonna repair how am I gonna build a romantic intimate life. Whereas when I got sober, I was like 29 years old and I thought, well, I have time to kind of work on myself. I didn't really date much for a couple of years. And then even when I did start dating, it was more like, well, let me just find a friend with benefits because that's all I'm really capable of. And then eventually I started trying to date in a more romantic, intimate way. But at 29, I thought I'm so behind the curve when it comes to being as successful in life and pursuing my passions and being a writer and even being a decent realtor, right? Like you already had that part covered. But I felt like I'm so behind the curve. I'm not, I didn't publish my first book till I was 50. You were already a success in all of these other ways, but now you've got this one area of like, and what's funny is, I say funny, it's almost unfortunate. Everything happens I like to think everything happens for a reason. Maybe you'll end up in in an AA group where there are some straight women and you'll meet somebody there. Being in a home group with a bunch of gay men is probably not going to help your romantic life a lot.
There's a lot of gay women. I get along very well.
Yeah.
This is it's so weird to talk about this. I don't expect to ever have an intimate romantic relationship, but God has always taken care of me.
Yeah.
And God has frequently given me, and by God, I mean in abstract,
Right.
has given me what I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Actually, when I first came into AA and we're doing the first three steps, and like the third step would drive me crazy, a God him of our understanding, him and God, and I would bitch and moan about that, and I would talk about I don't like the God word and this and that, and at a certain point I realized like I had been in the service of a higher power my whole life, and that I had been with God my whole life. I'm a vessel of God, and it's like I realized it was like being in the middle of the ocean and saying, I don't really believe in salt water. You know what I mean? I was so blessed. I really was.
Yeah.
And so if something's supposed to happen, it'll happen.
I absolutely believe that. I never expect, first of all, I think it's great not to have expectations. I think expecting anything it's nice to hope. It's nice to sort of have a goal, but I never expected to get married. I never expected to have love. I had a certain amount of hope that I kind of pushed to the back of my head because my goal was to be the best person I could be. Therefore, was slowly becoming the best potential partner for someone else. If you're becoming the best person you can be, you are therefore becoming the best potential partner for someone else. And, I've seen people, as an intimacy coach, I worked with a 65-year-old virgin once. I worked with a 70-year-old virgin once. I'm not in touch with the 70-year-old virgin, although I will say he had a very successful series of sessions. And I have every reason to believe that he's out there dating and doing well. The 65-year-old I'm still in touch with. And for the last 3 years, he's had led a very successful dating life. And he was someone who never went on a date. He had tremendous amount of therapy, but a tremendous amount of anxiety. And over the course of our coaching series, he blossomed in a way that some people spend 10 years, that I spent probably 10 or 15 years trying to get to. And you can call it God, a higher power, the universal creative consciousness. You can call it the force. You can call it his higher self. You can call it whatever magnetic force is out there. He did the work, and something brought him the women that are fulfilling him in a way that never happened before. And there's no reason that at 74 it should be any different. You could meet somebody at a Home Depot or, on an airplane, which is where we met, by the way.
I know, but we didn't actually.
You don't remember it because you were probably wasted,
Totally wasted.
but you
But
were charming as hell, by the way. Can I just say?
it's I don't buy lottery tickets because I can just see like one of the archangels going to God, and she's like saying, and she go, and they say to her, "You bought a lottery ticket." And she goes, "That goddamn son of a bitch! After everything I've done for him, he wants something more." Because I've won every lottery. I mean, even when I started producing films, this woman I knew was making a documentary about Towns Van Sant, and I got her some help, get her some money, and I became an executive producer. And it was Margaret Brown turned out to be a great filmmaker. I mean, it should have been a lousy filmmaker, but instead, our second film won a Peabody, and and premiered at Sundance. I mean, literally, I've won almost every lottery you can win, and if it happens again, great. And if it doesn't happen again, I have a great relationship with my son. I have a good relationship with my sisters. Even as messed up as I got, I didn't burn a lot of bridges. When I was accused of that sexual harassment thing, people said to me, "Oh, well, your friends must have turned on you," or this, that. Not one person even brought it up. Well, one or two people would bring it up and go, "We don't believe that," but not one person who I was involved with, said, "Oh, we didn't realize you were a monster." And
Yeah.
most we realized you were a monster, but not that kind of monster.
Well, I mean, I was so livid. You and I were briefly out of touch, I think, when that whole thing came about, and I don't want to delve into it. I'm sure you don't want to. I mean, I'd love to. I was with you at that time. I was seeing you almost every day at the time that she was accusing you,
Yes.
the period, and I was like, there's no way this happened. I would have seen it. There's no way I would not have seen it. It is impossible. And I remember calling you and say, put me on the stand. And you were like, don't worry, I'm going to get through this. I don't want to bother you with it. And I just wanted to get on the stand and tell the world. And it's funny, I have what anyone would call a checkered past. I've kind of made it work for me in that I write books about it. My third book is going to be about the most controversial sort of activities I was involved in, an aspect of the sex industry that not everybody knows about me. I mean, stripping is one thing, but then there are other things that I was very involved in that I consider a beautiful part of my life, but that my husband, who's a CEO, his friends, some of his friends knew right away, and they don't care because I make them so happy. But there are other people that we still, you know, go out of our way not to let them know, at least until they get to know me. So I can't imagine what it's like. I can't imagine going through life and having that attached to me and then being on a dating site and trying to actually forge a real relationship and having some guy, Google me and vet me and have that part of my life come up because it's not even as bad as what you were accused of. And I did those things and you didn't. But it does add an extra challenge. But I will say, uh, I personally find you to be one of the most lovable human beings I've ever met. For whatever that's worth. Also, don't forget, I was a dating coach for 6 years and I still do occasional pro bono work. So I'm here for you if you decide to let me help
You
you.
know, my life has told me what to do. People used to say, like, "What about South by Southwest?" And it's like saying to me, "What am I going to do with my kid? What's he going to be like in 3 years?" My kid's going to be who he is. South by Southwest is going to be my life is going to be what it is. And so far, it's worked out amazingly. I mean, I literally got a contract yesterday from a publisher because my friend C4 and I wrote a book on the films of Jonathan Demme, and a Mayflower Press, which is Columbia University's press, is going to put it out. It's a new chapter for me. And so I'm like, yes, I miss intimacy, but I don't know how to do it. And the other thing is, I watch all these westerns, and the guy comes home at the end to his woman, and they hug, and I miss that. Except I was in a meeting the other day, and it was 7 to 8, and around 7:30, I started thinking, I can't wait to get home and be alone. And it's like, so I don't know. I mean, I really.
Well, I mean, it's when you meet a woman who you connect with and you have chemistry with, and it's a little bit different than being and God love my home group and my AA friends, and it's a sense of belonging that I've never experienced really quite anywhere else. This thing about, the way we laugh about our deepest, darkest, stories. It's so comforting. It's incredible. We're like people who've all survived a shipwreck together, or those soccer players in the Andes. Only we understand what we've been through. You know what I mean? But at the same time, when you meet that person, I don't care how tired you are, how busy you are, you just want to be with them. And it's in it's like playing the piano. You can learn on a piece of paper that has the keys printed on it, but you're not a piano player till you get out there and play on a piano, right? You can watch choreography on YouTube and learn two-stepping, but until you hit that dance floor with a woman and a partner in your arms, and you practice the steps, and you keep doing it until and you stumble and you get it wrong and you step on her toes, and you spin her and you smack her into the wall, whatever, but you keep doing it until your body absorbs the moves and it becomes instinctual, and suddenly you're a dancer. It's the same with intimacy. You have to have that partner in your arms. You have to go through it. You have to make mistakes. You have to step on her toes. You have to stumble and fumble. But if you have a good one and you're meant to be together, you learn together, and then all of a sudden you're dancing, and you can't learn intimacy from a book or a coach. I mean, you can learn it from a coach in a way that you practice. It's a little bit like learning dance steps from a dance teacher. You can learn to dance, but you're not a real dancer till you go to the club and you ask that woman to dance and you get her out on the floor. Intimacy is the same way. So I think as long as you're not avoiding it, right? As long as you're not avoiding places or avoiding women that you think, if you meet a woman that you spark with, as long as you're not running the other direction, anything can happen.
I meet women I spark with, then they introduce me to their wife.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
people
that,
sometimes say AA is like a cult, and it's not. It's exactly the opposite. Because in a cult, you lose your identity to the cult,
yeah,
and in AA, it's about finding the best you
yeah,
on that journey.
yeah,
If I have an intimate relationship, that would be wonderful. But if I don't, the journey itself is extraordinary. I have a relationship with my son again.
yeah.
My sister just came to visit. My life is rich in a way I couldn't imagine.
And that's intimacy too. But you must feel a different connection with your son and your sister than you used to, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't have to be romantic intimacy to be fulfilling. As long as you're allowing them to see the real you with your vulnerabilities and your foibles and your flaws, and be able to really see them. Because when we're not really seeing other people. We're only seeing them as far as they can benefit us, really. Or we're seeing them as insofar as how we're trying to mirror only one aspect of ourselves, right? They're just someone we're bouncing off a fake version of ourselves. We're not really seeing them. I didn't develop a relationship with any of my siblings that you could call healthy or truly connected until I got sober.
Yeah, I mean, when I call my son, if I call him for no reason, he goes, "What's wrong, Dad?" I want to say hi. No, you can tell me what's wrong. I relapsed and go, no, no, I'm just calling to say it's a journey. The whole thing is a journey.
It is.
And
It's a beautiful journey.
one of the great things that we discover is the more we get to our humanity, the better the journey is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. I have to thank you so much for this. When I asked you to do this, you said, I don't think I'm going to make a very good interview. And I thought to myself, this might be the best one I do.